One of the biggest lessons I'm currently being reminded of recently is that grace is definitely needed in the process of becoming, and that creation is very rarely linear. I think sometimes I romanticize becoming as if I know exactly from the beginning where I'm supposed to go, every decision I'm supposed to make, how every plan is supposed to unfold. But that's rarely the case in life, and that's rarely the case in the creation process. Every writer rewrites a chapter of a book. Every artist takes a step back from their canvas and says, hey, maybe we need to actually fix this shade of color. Maybe we need to actually do this. There comes a point where we do, even with cooking and baking. I know personally I love to bake and cook. And so there are times that I'm like, okay, this is my vision. But then midway through, I'm like, oh, I need to edit this recipe a little bit to get a different flavor because this is not fulfilling how I originally thought it was supposed to be. And so for me, that's sometimes hard, especially since I'm a very high achiever. And in the past, I used to go into heavy perfectionism with stuff of like, I set this goal and I have to keep to it. And if I even edit it just slightly, then I'm a failure. That was kind of my mindset. And that's not a healthy mindset. And that's why I grew and I healed and I became self aware. And that's why we're having this conversation because I noticed those old patterns slowly creeping back up in my life, especially with the decision to pull back on my Friday videos for a couple weeks now, honestly, for a couple months, I've noticed that I really had that desire of, hey, we should probably pull back and start doing bi weekly. So that way we open up 2 more Fridays to work on other creative projects, especially as more opportunities are coming into your life for other endeavors that you want to do. And I had to have that hard chat with myself and realize, you know what? You cutting back to bi weekly videos on Friday is not failure. It's actually realignment with the vision because sometimes we need to have realignment because if you're not careful, let's say you're flying an airplane and you just get off 1 degree, next thing you know you're ending up in LA instead of Seattle because that's how much 1 degree over time changes based on your flight path. And so for me, the vision has always been to create to the best of my abilities. And I noticed that I'm slowly feeling burnout, continually doing like 3 videos a week on top of writing my books, on top of my research, on and everything else that I have going on in my life. It's like I'm starting to spread myself way too thin, and that's not healthy. And so I really did have to have grace. And that's actually something I want to read from my book, You Are Art, because I was reminded of my own work. Yeah, you know. But no, chapter 5, it actually talks about grace. And so I want to read this to you. It says, grace is not a reward you earn once you've got it all figured out. Grace is a present companion, a quiet friend who rides the bus with you while you're still learning the stops, who cheers you on in the mirror of the changing room as you try on those new shorts. It's our first time living this human experience, and learning, growing, and doing something new is not a flaw, but rather it's a privilege, one that many shy away from out of fear of not doing it perfectly and then allowing themselves to be shamed by the egoic flesh. Perfection was never the point. Presence was. Presence within yourself, presence in this moment, presence for life itself. Because if you constantly focused on all the ways you don't measure up, on all the things you're not, you're choosing to overlook the gifts that you do carry. You're choosing to ignore the beauty that you already are, and whether you realize it or not, you're also neglecting the inner child within, the one who's been quietly waiting to be seen, known, and loved. That love has always been there, patiently hoping you'd finally look inward and recognize it. There's often a confusion in our pursuit of becoming, this idea of making something of ourselves, where we mistake performance based achievements for identity based worth. We start believing our value is something we have to earn or prove rather than something that simply is. And it is what we create and bring about within the outer world from our core identity. Our core identity isn't a resume, it isn't found in applause, milestones, or metrics. It's found in being called by the name of I am, being and source itself. It's found in the dust and in the becoming and in the grace that refuses to let go. It's found in the truth of remembering what the Creator said about you in Isaiah 43:1. I have called you by name, and you are mine. And so, with that, the point I want to make with having grace and out of that just segment I read out of my book is if your life is a masterpiece, why would you expect your first draft to be your final one? Genuinely. My first book, I fucking wrote that book a dozen times over. This book has taken me over a decade to write because I constantly put it off and then I'd prolong and then I wrote it and then I rewrote it and then I changed the direction of it. And then even hell, last March in 2025, I actually had written my full first complete draft on my computer, and I talk about that in my book. And literally as I finished the book, I'm like, oh my God, it's been a week of sleep deprivation and high caffeine of coffee. My Google Docs glitches and it deletes it. And I am just sitting there in shock of like, I just lost a week of my life. And I definitely at that point wanted to throw my computer out the window And then I definitely was reminded of that vision. It was when you have the vision, you cannot erase the vision. You can only expand the vision and make it better. And so I did. I kind of got that Katniss Everdeen spirit of if we burn, you burn with us. I'm gonna rewrite this better, just not today. I'm going to bed. And so I did. I kind of put it off for a couple more months, and then I picked it back up in July, and then I started rewriting it and learning new lessons to then put into the book. And now it is what it is, and we've got the full complete copy. Which, if you don't have your copy, you should support a local artist and go grab one. I'll link it down below. But no, the point of this is if your life is truly a masterpiece, why do we expect our first draft to be our final draft? Like, we are not machines. We are not perfectionist human beings. The whole point is presence. The whole point is having presence in the process of becoming and being so self-aware and loving yourself so much that you can respect and notice when something is no longer in alignment with that presence, with being in that state of being in the present moment and having that peace within yourself to realize when something is no longer in 100% alignment as it was. Just like tuning something. Okay? When your guitar or your ukulele starts being out of tune, you're going to retune it. You got to put that direction back on so that way you don't get off direction and end up in LA from Seattle. So sometimes I definitely do fall into this mindset that I should already have it all figured out. And I definitely think that still does come from old thinking patterns in my childhood because there was very much a lack of grace in the home that I grew up in. If like you messed up one time, there was not second chances. You got very heavily reprimanded for it. And so that definitely created this like perfectionism, because I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to get punished. And so I definitely see how that definitely into my early adult years was still heavily there. And then over the past few years, it slowly creeps up over time when I do make decisions that go against the initial vision that I had for something. So for example, when I started out with my YouTube, I made the commitment of, you know what? I'm going to start posting every single Friday. Like that was my goal because I had procrastinated over the years of posting consistently because I didn't believe in myself. So then like back in like January, I'm like, you know what? I'm definitely believing in myself. This is a goal I have for myself this year. This is what I'm going to do. Well, now fast forward, it's been 6 months and I'm starting to see new opportunities come into my life, which are beautiful. And these are the things I once prayed to have. But then I'm also realizing, hey, my time is my currency. How do I want to spend it? And with these new opportunities, if I was to keep going at the rate every single Friday, then I would also have to cut back on my writings. And writing is something that I'm very passionate about, writing more books. That's one of the things that bring me joy. That's kind of why I also make my YouTube channel, is so that way I can put all my files out of my head because I'm a vocal processor. And that way I can easily find it because it's so much easier than trying to find notes and docs and papers and all that. It's so much easier just to be like, okay, scroll through my videos. Oh, yes, this is the one about grace. Let's see what Destiny had to say 6 months ago about it. And so for me, it was definitely kind of this momentarily of like, really, you're gonna fail on this goal. You haven't even stuck with it for an entire year. And that was kind of the first thought that came into my mind. And then I realized that wasn't me, it was just my mind. And I caught that thought, you got to take everything captive to Christ, that anointing inside of you. And I had to sit with myself and say, wait, yes, I started out with the goal initially to do this. This was the vision. And I have stayed consistent. But I'm also self aware enough and I respect myself enough right now to realize that the rate that I'm going at is no longer working for that vision. And for me to continue on every single Friday on top of all of my Tuesday videos, which are honestly more of importance to me because that's more of my life passion, where these are kind of how you apply the passion. That's kind of how it sits in my head. Tuesdays are like the schoolwork and Fridays are the homework of this is what it is and this is how you apply it. And so as I've gotten older, I've kind of gotten more away, I guess, from like the self-help kind of stuff, just because that's not really who I am anymore, because I've kind of helped myself. And I'm not saying that people don't value my Friday videos, but for me, I noticed that like, yes, I have passion for them, but I'm a lot more passionate about my just research and my history and like my God core topics, because that's ultimately where I'm pursuing higher education in. So I definitely like that more. And so I realized I had to sit there with myself and I had to be like, okay, pause, wait a minute. If you realize it's not working, then change it. Like, you can't just keep driving a broken vehicle. Like, if your vehicle needs an oil change, then you need to get that oil changed. Just like if you realize what you're currently creating is no longer working, if the flavors of your meal are no longer flavorful, then you need to change it. And that does not mean you failed. That means you're actually succeeding, because fear of failure is just fear of judgment. And honestly, that's what I realized I was most afraid of when I got to the root of it. Is I was like, oh, I'm just afraid of somebody judging me or being upset or disappointed in me that I pull back on my Friday videos, because I used to struggle really bad with people pleasing. And so sometimes those little monsters want to creep back up in your head, those old patterns, because life is like a spiral. And so you're constantly revisiting lessons and seasons of like, okay, at this new state of consciousness, how are you going to interact with this? Are you going to succumb to people pleasing, or are you going to say, you know what? No, I'm not going to abandon myself and hope that somebody won't abandon me. And I'm going to love me and the vision that I've been given. And I'm going to respect myself enough to honor that vision and creation process. And since I do respect myself, I realize that the best way to honor this is to pull back. So grace is very much meeting yourself with compassion while remaining committed to your growth. Because that's the point of life. The whole point of life is, do you see the growth? If you've seen the growth, then you're succeeding, even if it's 1%. Now, don't judge yourself on how much you have or haven't grown, but grace is remaining committed to yourself while in the process of that growth. It's looking at yourself in your life honestly and saying, you know what? This isn't working anymore. And then loving yourself enough to change it and giving yourself permission to change it. Because sometimes I think we can get in this rigid thinking mindset, at least I know I have, and I forget that free will means I can freely change my life as I please, and that I am truly one decision away from a completely different life. And I did. I realized as soon as I posted that post on Monday of like, hey guys, I'm changing this around, I felt just so much relief in my chest because I knew that was the right decision for me. But I also saw where I definitely was afraid to make that decision because of past patterns that sometimes stick still very strongly in my thinking patterns. And that's where I think we also have to remember that life is not static and linear, and that every single season will require something different of us. Look at literally nature, okay? Like we reflect the cosmos, as the cosmos, so the soul, as nature, so us. And so if nature has different seasons, if we need a winter coat in winter, but then we need to wear shorts in the summer, don't you think we're going to need different tools and different character traits and different abilities in different seasons? Don't you think we're going to have to spend and manage our time differently, just as in this winter we have to spend our time shoveling if you live in the north, and then in the summer you spend your time swimming and cooling down in the waters? Don't you think you're going to have to spend your time differently with your vision process in the seasons that it's in? We cannot expect ourselves to remain the same person while completely changing our lives and creating a different life for ourselves. So if we're creating a new life, then that needs a new version of us, that needs a new identity. Just like I've talked about it before with the thinking patterns, if you want an abundant life, you can't go into that life with a scarcity mindset and a scarcity nervous system. That's discoherence. That is not in alignment. And so if you're going into a new season of a version of you that it honors their craft a whole lot more, then you need to honor yourself and your time. And one of the reasons why I think we find grace so hard to give ourselves sometimes is that we were taught to perform and abandon ourselves, forgetting that grace is an ever present companion, and that we were praised for achievements and for what we produced and for what we did and for what we had, rather than for who we are. And grace is reminding us of who we are, and are we living in alignment with ourselves, or are we living out of alignment? And grace demands us and asks us to live in alignment with ourselves. And from that grace comes joy in life. And that's even what the Bible talks about when you take it back to like the Hebrew word or the Greek. It means to find favor, to find favor with life, to have joy in life. And so grace wants you to have favor and joy in your life. And so if you're also trying to keep pushing something like a machine of like, you know what, I set out to do this and blah, 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 and you're living out of alignment, you're not going to be joyful. Okay, but to the righteous, the Lord gives joy. And being in alignment with the Lord means you're going to have joy. And that means you have that grace because you love yourself. So you're no longer abandoning yourself or abandoning your craft. You're living in alignment with yourself, which then betters your craft, because when you're in alignment and you're pouring into your own cup and then you're overflowing, that then pours out and overflows into every single project you make. And so when I had that hard conversation with myself, it very much was noticing that it wasn't even about YouTube of the goal that I set. It was rather about noticing the pattern of old self abandonment that wanted to creep back up. And that old voice very much is the voice of keep giving, even if it costs you yourself. And that's not love. That is self abandonment dressed up as responsibility. Because the truest form of self love is not saying affirmations in the mirror, it is honoring your craft, and it is hearing that inner voice and respecting it, especially when that inner voice, that word, that logos that directs your steps, that is a light unto your path, as the Bible would say, says, hey, we need to change what's happening here. Hey, We need to turn our sails a little bit to go in this direction. We need to turn a little bit here. Let's go a few degrees this way. Hey, let's start actually cultivating this. Let's pull back on this project right now so that way we can put towards here. And that's part of living in alignment and being connected to source, is listening to that voice and trusting that gut, trusting that intuition, and moving when it says to move, because opportunities are always there, and you got to set yourself up for those opportunities. You got to set yourself up for those successes. And so how often do we actually sabotage that success and we miss those opportunities out of this false sense of responsibility and loyalty to an old system? That inner voice, that little voice of logos and wisdom, is trying to guide you to bring about the fruition of the things that you've prayed for. And the irony is, so many of us pray for direction, we're simultaneously resisting it when it arrives because it doesn't look like the plan that we originally had. But as the Bible says, lean not on your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight. When you try to lean on your own understanding, that's saying, hey, I set this goal to post every single Friday, and that's trying to force it when the little voice is saying, hey, we need to actually change this. But creation has never been rigid. Creation ebbs and flows because energy ebbs and flows. And so, as do we in the seasons that we're in. So that's genuinely the question for you in your evaluation process, is what things in your life are no longer working, but you have continually kind of ignored and made illusions of, no, it's fine. But you know deep down, if you sat with yourself, it's no longer in alignment to the current person that you are, slash you're becoming, slash you're wanting to become. But you keep trying to force it because you originally set off with this plan and you don't want to feel like a failure for stopping the current process and editing it. But the most beautiful works of art aren't created because the artist stubbornly refused to change the sketch. They're created because the artist listens to that inner voice. It observes, it adjusts, it reframes, not because they failed, but because they were paying attention to the creation process. Because self abandonment, that egoic flesh, that Hasatan, it's very much going to condemn you and judge you and shame you for changing your original sketch. But grace doesn't shame, and there is no condemnation in Christ. And it is by grace you have been saved. Now, people think in religion of, oh, yes, Jesus died on the cross for my sins and I didn't deserve it. That's grace. No. By grace you have been saved, as in that joy, that life, that favor has been given to you by life. And now life is asking you to give that to yourself freely, just as you give other people grace and second chances. Grace does not shame. Grace does not belittle. Grace tells the truth with compassion. And the truth is not a bad thing. Okay, there is no shame in telling yourself, you know what, this is no longer working. There is no shame in saying, hey, I need to change this. There is no shame that's saying, hey, you know what, I don't like that shade of paint. I don't like how these cookies turned out. I don't like the fact that I'm feeling burnt out continually posting every single Friday. I think something needs to change. Grace says, hey, you're tired. Maybe we need to learn to rest better. Grace says that you've outgrown this and it's okay to let it go, that you're still worthy while you're still learning. And so, my challenge for you, as I've done with myself and I continually do with myself as a check in, is once a week, give yourself grace and permission to evaluate your life. Because the champion, the athlete that runs for the gold to get that crown, is very much in tune with what is and is not working, and they're cutting out anything that no longer works. And give yourself permission to cut out the things that no longer work, genuinely. And I say this as somebody, again, who used to lack and struggle with giving myself that permission. Give yourself permission to cut out people who are no longer the best for you. Give yourself permission to cut out the things that are no longer good for you, habits that you no longer align with, or activities that you used to do, or things that you used to go to. Cut them out. Okay, if YouTube isn't working every single Friday and you need to pull back for this season, then pull it back out, because nothing says that you can't go back to posting every single Friday in a couple months from now if that time frame opens up. But what is requiring of you right now to then create that ultimate greater vision for your life that you're feeling led and called to create? And then what good is going to come out of that vision to then impact and influence other people? So give yourself permission to evaluate, not to criticize, but to observe your life. And then I want you to ask yourself these 4 questions. And these are the 4 questions that I asked myself and I journaled. And that's also where I came to the conclusion of self-love. You know what? This is the best step for my life. Is what's giving me life? What brings me my passions and my joy right now? What is draining my life? And what do I feel like I am starting to feel like it's a task I have to do rather than I could do? What is asking me to grow? Where is life leading and calling me to grow? Where do I want to grow? Where am I feeling led energetically to grow? And what am I afraid to release? And why am I afraid to release it? So write those answers down. Don't rush them, but genuinely think about them. Start sitting with your life and do that. Do that with relationships, do that with opportunities, do that with your career path, do that with your creative process, do that with your own personal daily life. Genuinely have that audit of how do I spend my time? And is it growing you? Are you stagnant? Do you feel comfort? Where are you lacking courage that you need to just push yourself out of that comfort zone to do that hard thing? Genuinely get inward with yourself, go inward and evaluate. Because to know thyself is to know the secrets of the universe and to know God. And with that, nothing is impossible because the depth of your growth, your ability to grow is based on your ability to have that hard, honest, truthful conversation with yourself. And wherever you're not being truthful with yourself, you're stagnating your growth and you're not giving yourself grace because grace tells the truth. And it tells the truth with compassion. So genuinely write those down and then observe them because patterns reveal themselves to those who are willing to pay attention. Because the goal of becoming is not perfection, the goal is alignment in life. That is what it means to no longer be a sinner. It means you're no longer out of alignment. The point of life is to be in alignment and to be in alignment with that energy wherever it ebbs and flows, even if that means changing direction of the current plans that you had. It's creating a life where your values, your actions, your relationships, and your inner voice are all moving in the same direction. And that's what grace makes possible. Not a perfect life, but a deeply authentic one. And maybe becoming was never about proving your worth. And even chapter 5 in my book talks about that. Maybe it's about uncovering the person who has always existed beneath the expectations, the fear, the performance, and the noise. You're not a machine built to endlessly produce. You are a living, breathing work of art, and art requires rest at times because that's where wild things happen. Wild things happen in the stillness and in the moments that we just allow ourselves to be still. And every masterpiece evolves over time. Every masterpiece requires space to grow and bloom and to become its own creation. So if you find yourself in a season of editing and pruning and becoming and rearranging your life, do not mistake it for failure. That is the farthest thing from failure. It is very much the artist who has not given up on the masterpiece and is actually making it onto more perfection, being in alignment, because that is an artist who has enough self awareness and love and respect for their artwork to say, you know what? We need to re edit this draft. We need to revise this vision and we need to make sure that it's in alignment purely with the greater vision for our lives. And perhaps the greatest form of self love is having enough grace to become who you're meant to be instead of forcing yourself to remain on who you've always been.